we need to get into Genesis 42 and 43, but before we do that, actually, I was just thinking as we were driving over here on our short drive to church, I was thinking about 1 Corinthians 15. So let me just turn there real quickly. You'll recognize 1 Corinthians 15 as the resurrection chapter. I've been thinking about Easter. I've been thinking about the resurrection. And so I promise that we'll get into Genesis. But a little bit of 1 Corinthians 15 first. A lot of folks, especially lost people, ask the question, well, like, what's the proof of the resurrection? How can I know the resurrection actually happened? And of course, I mean, the real answer, I guess, probably to that is actually given earlier in the book of 1 Corinthians, where Paul refers in 1 Corinthians 2:14, he says, "But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned." Right? And the idea that essentially you'll not believe in the resurrection, right? Unless God does a work in your heart, a work in your mind. But that does not mean that there's not evidence for the resurrection. It doesn't mean that it is not rational and reasonable. Indeed, faith is very rational. Faith is very reasonable. Faith is the evidence of things not seen, right? Hebrews 11:1. And so it involves evidence, it involves substance. Faith is incredibly rational. But in regard to that evidence, in the first few verses, I was just thinking about driving over this morning, I was thinking about these verses where Paul actually lays out three pretty good pieces of evidence for the resurrection in the first part, really the first, 11 verses of 1 Corinthians 15. So let me read these to you, and then we'll turn back to Genesis. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 1, Paul writes and says, "Moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which you received, and in which you stand, by which you also are saved, if you hold fast to the word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain." And so the idea that, hey, we believe the gospel, if you say you believe the gospel but don't hold on to the gospel, well, then your profession was not real. But here's some of the evidence he starts to lay out. He says, verse 3, "For I delivered to you, first of all, that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures." Right? So, a great piece of evidence for the resurrection is the fact that it was the fulfillment of revealed prophecy, right? And throughout the Old Testament, and there are dozens of prophecies of the coming Messiah. There are dozens of very specific prophecies, even about the resurrection. And I think of Psalm 16, I think of Psalm 22, I think of Isaiah 53, among many other passages. And so what Paul says here is that, hey, I'm just telling you that which we received, that which we were told, really for hundreds and hundreds of years, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. Right? And even as we're focusing on the person of Joseph in Genesis currently, we talked last week a little bit about how Joseph is, in large sense, Joseph is a Christ figure, right? And there are all these nebulous prophecies and allusions that are kind of woven into the Joseph story. And again, we talked about some of that last week. Verse 5, he says that Jesus was seen by Cephas, or by Peter, then by the 12, and after that he was seen by over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part remain to the present day, but some have fallen asleep. And so, first piece of evidence for the resurrection is the fact that it's fulfilled prophecy. Second piece is that, hey, there are all these eyewitnesses who saw the resurrection, right? And Paul's like, if you don't believe me, well, go and talk to some of them. Some are alive to the present day, he says, right? And matter of fact, there's over 500 of them that he refers to. And so you've got the fulfillment of prophecy, you've got the testimony of eyewitnesses, and he goes on and says, and then last of all, he was seen by me also, as by one born out of due time. And so I myself am an eyewitness, he says. But then this verse 9, he says, "For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am. And his grace towards me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all, yet not I, but the grace of God which was in me. Therefore, whether it was I or they, so we preach, and so you, readers, you church, believed." And maybe the greatest piece of evidence for the resurrection is what Paul has just referred to in verses 9, 10, and 11. It's the existence of the church, right? It's the fact that we're here. That there's been no other organization like the church that has been around for so long, and it's not like we've always been welcomed, right, by the world. As Paul himself says, I persecuted the church. And what we've seen historically is that the more persecution the church receives, and the faster it grows, right? Which again is just a testimony that the church is a supernatural thing. It's not an organization. It's a body of believers. And the faith keeps getting passed down. It gets passed down. It gets passed down. There's not a single one of us in the room. There's not a single human being who was ever born who knew anything about the gospel, who knew anything about Christ, who was part of the church, right? We all arrived with no knowledge. We all arrived totally lost. But somebody told us, right? And we believed. And so we are the church. And so how can we know the resurrection is true? Well, number one, fulfilled prophecy. Number two, lots of eyewitnesses. And number three, the fact that the church exists. It always has and always will. And so again, just kind of thinking about Easter and Easter things, and I was thinking about that this morning. And so that's from 1 Corinthians. But we need to get into Genesis 42 and 43. We've only got 4 weeks left in the book of Genesis, and so we're nearing the end. And so next week, no class, but then 4 weeks of Genesis after that. Then we're going to move on to the Gospel of John the following week beyond that. But Genesis 42. So again, we're in the Joseph narrative. Been looking at Joseph for a number of weeks, and we left things off last week in Genesis 41, where Joseph kind of had this really unexpected, I guess you could say meteoric, rise to power, where he goes from being a slave in prison, a foreign slave in prison in the morning, and by afternoon, and he is second in control of the most powerful nation in the world. But God had been preparing him for that for 13 years or so in prison. He then assumes the reins as second in control. He puts this plan of taxation into the works for 7 years as there's great abundance. And then a year or two of famine settles in, and that is where we left things off. And so by way of chronology, it's been probably a little over 20 years, I guess you could say, maybe since Joseph had been sold into slavery. By way of his age, maybe he's 38, 39 years old, hadn't seen his family in decades. And Genesis 42, verse 1, says, "Now, when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt," and so we're back in Canaan now, and there's Jacob living in Haran, which was his homestead. When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" And he said, "Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. So go down to that place and buy food for us there, that we may live and not die." And so they've been through 2 years of famine, and you can imagine anything that had been saved, any of the supply or stock of grain, had been used up by now. He saw that that year's harvest had probably been ruined, and so there was going to be no grain for next year. But Haran is located there on the trade route from Egypt up into Mesopotamia, and he's seen all kinds of folks going back and forth, and he's heard that, hey, there's grain in Egypt. And so he tells his sons, go down to Egypt and buy us some food. Verse 3, and so Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And so we still see that this sort of unhealthy, blatant favoritism is still in play. Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, had 2 sons, right? He thinks Joseph is dead. There's only Benjamin left. So he's not going to send Benjamin down. Now, Benjamin's not a little boy. Benjamin is a man. He is probably about 30 years old, right? And so, but nevertheless, Dad won't let him take the trip down with his brothers because he's afraid of losing this son. And so again, kind of still some unhealthy family dynamics taking place there. Verse 5, and the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed. And so there's apparently a kind of a caravan, a train of people going down, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now, verse 6, we know this. Now, Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. So this is fascinating to me, right? And so, I mean, he's second in control of the land, right? And this is a land of millions and millions of people. And apparently there's this sort of train of people flooding in from Canaan and Mesopotamia and other places who are going down to buy grain. And man, if I'm Joseph, like, am I the guy that everyone's coming to see? No, right? Like I'm second in control of the country. I've got people for that, right? But I wonder if in Joseph's mind, I wonder, I mean, of course, he must have had people, I mean, who were meeting with people to sell the grain, right? Because it's really impossible that he could deal with, I mean, all of the commerce that was taking place. But in his mind, I think Joseph knows, I mean, eventually my family is going to have to come down, right? Because he knows the famine is throughout the entire land, because God had told him that, right, through Pharaoh's dreams. And so in my mind, he's kind of like got like some kind of overlord kind of perspective of the crowds of people who are coming in to meet with the people to buy grain, and he's got his eye out for his brothers because he knows they're going to eventually come. And maybe he kind of even knows that time-wise, they're going to show up maybe about 2 years, maybe into the famine, right? Because that would make sense. And so I think this is sort of all a plan that Joseph has thought through. After all, man, he's had about 9 years as second in charge of Egypt to think through these things. He's had much longer than that to think through his family. And I doubt that it was just a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing that was going on here. I think this is a bigger plan that is being unfolded. And so it says, middle of verse 6, and Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth, which is how everybody would approach Joseph. And Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them, and he spoke roughly to them, and he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And so the question is, like, why did they not recognize him, right? Like how could they not tell who he was? Well, I think a few things, right? I mean, number one, it's been a couple decades since they've seen each other. And while I may look fairly similar to as I looked 20 years ago, I'm sure that when I was a teenager, fast forward 20 years from that, there was a good bit of change that took place, right? And so Joseph had been a teenager when he last saw them, and people tend to change from childhood to teenager to adult. And so I imagine he looks different. Again, it's been 15, 20, maybe 25 years. I think secondarily, as we learn here coming up in the narrative, his brothers actually assumed that he was dead, right? So they weren't even looking for him, right? And so it's been a couple decades of time. They think Joseph's dead anyways, and so they weren't looking to kind of bump into him. But then thirdly, he's adopted, I mean, complete sort of the Egyptian culture at this point in time. He would have had to be second in charge, and he's got an Egyptian wife. He's got an Egyptian job. He's probably wearing Egyptian clothes. We know he's speaking the Egyptian language. He's speaking through an interpreter, right? And so all these things kind of serve to kind of cover up who he is. So he knows them, but they don't know him. I was thinking about this. Happens to me sort of in one sense, in a different context all the time. You know, I meet students all the time. Last night we were in Walmart, and we were accosted by a couple of students who were really happy to see me. And so we talked and shook hands and kind of jabbed a bit, and we were walking away, and Dawn's like, "Who are those guys?" I'm like, "I have no idea who they are," right? Because there's tens of thousands of them everywhere, right? And those guys are probably in some online class. They were names on a spreadsheet. I've never met them. But they've spent time with me every week watching videos, right? And so they think they know me, but I don't know them, right? Kind of same thing here, right? Where one side knows, the other side doesn't know what's going on. But they say, we're from Canaan, and we're here to buy food, which should have been obvious, that's why everyone was there. Verse 8, and so Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he'd had back in chapter 37, and he said to them, "You're spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." And so it's pretty easy here, I think, to see that, well, Joseph might have had a plan, and maybe he's kind of dreamed about what it's going to be like when his family eventually shows up. Still, nevertheless, seeing them, and he's a bit undone, right? And so he speaks roughly to them, verse 7, which maybe that wasn't part of the land. It kind of just, part of the idea just kind of came out. He's speaking roughly to them. And then when they start talking, his first thing is to accuse them of being spies, which in a sense sort of makes no sense, right? Because if you're going to spy out, your neighbor, like, you don't send 10 brothers to do it, right? Like, you send maybe a guy or two, but you don't pick like 10 guys who look exactly alike and send them in like, you guys be the spies. Again, it makes no sense. But Joseph nevertheless accuses them of that, because maybe this is sort of one of the things that he's come up with maybe in his mind. If I happen to run into one of the brothers, I'll accuse him of being a spy or whatever. But this is the path he chooses to go down. Verse 10, and they said to him, "No, my lord, but we're your servants. We have come to buy food. We are one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies." I imagine that phrase, like, "we are honest men." I imagine like Joseph kind of chuckled a bit. Like, no, you're not. like y'all tried to kill me, right? You're not honest men at all. But that was what they claimed. But he said to them, "No, you've come to see the nakedness of the land." And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more." Right? Again, he's like, "Well, that's what you think." But Joseph said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying, you're spies," which again, this makes no sense. He says, "In this manner you shall be tested by the life of Pharaoh. You shall not leave this place unless your younger brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else, by the life of Pharaoh, surely you're spies." And so he put them all together in prison for 3 days. So again, I think you can kind of see here that Joseph is coming a little bit unhinged in what he's saying, how he's saying it, what he's accusing them of. Because, his plan here is, okay, so I'm going to send, one of you back to get the other brother by way of a test, which in a sense seems like a reasonable enough test, right? But it doesn't make sense sort of bigger picture, right? Because the reason why they're there is to buy food, because the family is starving back home. And there's no way that one guy is going to be able to go back home and bring enough food to keep everyone alive. And by the way, probably where Joseph is located, in the land of Egypt, he's probably in the capital city, which would have been the city of Memphis at this day and time, which was about a 500-mile journey from where Jacob was dwelling, which would have taken a month one way to make. And so this is like a minimum 2-month journey back and forth. But they're there because people are starving and need food. And so the whole thing doesn't make sense at all, this plan. And maybe Joseph sort of understands that in one sense, because he doesn't actually send one of them away. Verse 17, he puts them all in prison together for 3 days, right? And maybe he's trying to get them to feel a little bit like what he felt for 13 years, right, in prison. But he kind of comes to his senses a bit here, verse 18. "Then Joseph said to them on the 3rd day, 'Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are honest men,'" which I know you're not, under his breath, "let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine to your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." Much better plan. Rather than sending one and keeping 9, let's send 9 back and keep 1, right? So that way you guys can bring food back, rescue your family. I've still got one here in prison, kind of as a guarantee. And this seems like a better arrangement. And they did so. Verse 21. "And then they said to one another, 'We're truly guilty concerning our brother, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us.'" And it's so interesting. Like if you're guilty of something, right? Then you process everything through that guilt, right? The book of Proverbs actually talks about this a good bit, how guilt kind of warps our perception of things. So it's been 20 years since they sold Joseph into slavery, right? But this one thing happens to them. They're being accused of being spies, and they immediately go to what they had done together against their brother, not knowing that Joseph is their brother. And verse 22, "And Reuben answered them and said, 'Did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us.'" And so as we see here in a second, Joseph actually understands this conversation they're having, right? And that must have been a bit sort of unnerving to him to hear this conversation. But this was new information because maybe in his mind, Reuben was the most responsible, right? Because he was the oldest brother. But now Joseph learns that actually Reuben was actually arguing against that plan to sell him and to even harm him. But Joseph wouldn't have known that. So this is new information that comes to him. Verse 23, but they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. And then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. And we know back from the narrative earlier on in chapter 37 that Simeon, in a sense, was the one who was the most responsible for Joseph being sold. We saw that he was kind of like the ringleader. And I wonder if the brothers sort of found this a bit ironic that the one among them who they knew was the most bloodthirsty, the one who was responsible for the plan to sell Joseph, which they were talking about, is the one whom he chooses to keep. I bet they saw that as kind of confirmation that this is actually why these things are happening to us. And I wonder, maybe sort of further here, the plan here to get Benjamin to come down to Egypt, I wonder if in Joseph's mind, I wonder if he's thinking, I wonder if they did to Benjamin what they did to me. Because, hey, these brothers obviously are bloodthirsty. They sold me because they didn't like me. Joseph can kind of put it together. I know that my younger brother is now going to be the favorite son. He's now got the coat of many colors, probably, right? Because dad likes us the best, because he liked our mom the best. And if that's happened, 20 years have gone by, I wonder if the brothers actually have sold him off or killed him as well, like they did to me. And that may be in part what's driving this entire thing to get Benjamin brought down to Egypt, right? Because he knows that they're really not honest men. Verse 25, and then Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. And thus he did for them. And so this is like a complete 180. He's gone from speaking to them harshly, accusing them of being slaves, of planning initially to keep all of them but one in prison, to now he's sending all of them back but one. And not only is he sending them back, but he gives them the grain they came to buy. He gives them the money back that they had brought to buy. And on top of that, he gives them provisions for the journey, like all the food that their animals needed. And they must have sort of thought, like, what just happened, right? In my mind, I thought of Isaiah's prophecy later on in the chronology of the Bible, but in Isaiah 55, God says, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you have no money, come buy and eat. Yes, come buy wine and milk without money and without price. He's talking about the gospel there, right? That the gospel is incredibly costly, but it's also free. And here, Joseph, the Christ figure, provides for God's people and does so for free, giving them blessings, right? Not charging them. And I think this might be sort of, in essence, a hidden gospel allusion as well. And so, verse 26, they loaded their donkeys with their grain and departed from there, but as one of them opened his sack, we don't know which one, to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of his sack. And he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. And then this interesting response, and their hearts failed them, and they were afraid. And they said to one another, what is this that God has done to us, right? And it's the whole idea, that in living with guilt, it'll cause us to even view God's blessings with suspicion, right? That rather than being joyful that, hey, look, here's our money, right? And here's the food and here's the provision. When they see it, again, because of their guilt, they immediately jump to a fearful conclusion, right? And perhaps they're thinking, well, hey, they're going to think that we stole the money, or we didn't give the money for the food. And they automatically, again, jump to the worst case scenario, right? And we've talked about this before. We do this. And I think a lot of times, actually, the reason why we do this is actually because of guilt we feel, because of sin, is that we worry and we're anxious. And I think the way I've defined it before is that anxiety, it's simply the misuse of God's good gift of imagination, right? And God's given us imagination so that we can think about sort of things. And what happens is when we worry, we think about the bad things that are going to happen, and we get anxious. And we all know that most of the time, things that we're anxious about and worry about actually never actually happen and come true, right? And so we take that good gift of imagination and we misuse it, and it produces anxiety and worry in us and fear. And this is exactly what happens to Joseph's brothers because they're being driven by the guilt that they feel and not being driven by grace that they have received. Verse 29, and they went to Jacob their father in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who was Lord of the land spoke roughly to us, and he took us for spies for the country. But we said to them, we're honest men, we're not spies. We're 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more. The youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. And then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, by this I will know that you're honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine for your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that I know that you're not spies, but that you're honest men, and I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade freely in the land. And then it happened, as they emptied their sacks, that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in the sack. It wasn't just one guy, all of them. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, you have bereaved me. Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me. Well, again, like what a response by Jacob, right? Like, why does he jump to the same bad conclusion? Like, you guys have done this to me. This is wrong. They're all afraid. They can't sort of process the blessing that has come to them. I don't know. I was just thinking about like you ever like, I don't know, like back when we used to actually have paper money and stuff, which I know we don't anymore, but the like you would go to the store and like someone would give you back like too much change or whatever like that. I remember one time in particular, I was buying actually I was buying flowers. It must have been like Valentine's Day or something like that. There's a little florist there that's on 1A South there by that auction house that's for sale now. And I went in there and I bought some flowers, and it was, I don't know, probably $20, whatever it was. And so I gave $20, and the gal gave me back like $65 in change and the flowers, right? And so I'm walking out, I see the money, and I'm like, so I go back, I'm like, hey, like you give me like the wrong change, like you gave me back even way more than what I gave you. And like she got hostile with me, right? Like, I mean, she's like, no, I didn't. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure you did. And she's like, so I was like, all right, I'm good. It's, I mean, it was just like, I was trying to actually, be honest and sort of give the blessing back, but that was an insult to the lady that owned the store. Man, you got to view the blessing properly, right? I mean, don't view it as something to be fearful. I mean, yes, try to give it back, right? But if they won't take it back, I'm asking once, right? And then I'm walking out the door with the money and the flowers, and feeling blessed because of it, right? Verse 37. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, so here, this is amazing to me. Right, so they've just told Dad, all right, that all this has happened. Like, look, we've got the food, we've got the money. We didn't even have to use our own stuff to feed the donkeys. Simeon is there, but Joseph kind of resolves, like, well, hey, no, like we're not going back because it's too much of a risk. And so Reuben speaks up and says to his father, kill my two sons if I don't bring him back to you and put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. So, like, what kind of an answer is that? Like, I mean, like he's afraid of like taking Benjamin down, to rescue Simeon. And so Reuben's response is, well, hey, if we take Benjamin back down and they kill him, well, then you can kill two of your grandkids as a penalty for that. Like, what? Like, it's pretty clear to me. Like later on, when Jacob's sort of blessing his children, he says that Reuben is unstable as water, right? He's clearly unstable, right? Because this is not a great solution. You can kill your grandkids if your favorite son is killed, right? What he says here in verse 38, but Jacob says, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he alone is left. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave. Everyone's acting irrationally. Like Joseph, Reuben, and Jacob, like his response is like, well, no, he's not going. And so, man, we'll just write off Simeon. didn't really like him anyways, right? Like apparently, I mean, like what's Simeon going to think about this whole deal, right? Like, and what if his brother, like we knew he didn't like Simeon, right? I mean, what a response. And like, this is logically, so again, remember, 500-mile journey one way, a month, right? So like, you can only carry back so much grain. It's not like they brought like an entire like trainload of grain. Like they brought a bunch of sacks of grain that they could carry. But they're in the midst of a 2-year, at this point, famine. Like there's no way if they could even plant the grain like that day that they could make enough food or to feed them all. And so like he's got to know that we're going to need more grain eventually, right? And so the entire thing it's just, it makes no sense. But this is what sin is like, right? I mean, sin makes no sense. Sin makes us irrational. Sin makes us anxious and worried and reach bad conclusions and just act in really poor ways, which is what Jacob's doing here, right? But the narrative goes on. And so, as we know, chapter 43, verse 1, now the famine was severe in the land, and it came to pass, when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought from Egypt, that their father said to them, go back and buy us a little bit of food. Now they're like, Dad, like, weren't you paying attention earlier? Like, if you weren't paying attention, you should have at least been asking, where's Simeon, right? Obviously, right? Dad, pay attention here, right? What's going on? Go back and buy us some more food. And Judah spoke to them. So now this is actually, I think, pretty significant. So remember, Reuben was the one that had the bad idea, like, hey, kill your grandkids if Benjamin gets killed. But Judah spoke to him, saying, the man solemnly warned us, saying, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. And so Judah here steps in, and we'll see here that he actually proposes that he himself will be the substitute. He actually says he'll be surety, which is the word for the guarantee, right? Of a covenant. And of course, we know that Christ is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? That Christ is our substitute. Judah volunteers to be the substitute himself, which is a better plan than Reuben's plan. Verse 6, and Israel said, why did you deal so wrongfully with me as to tell the man whether you still had another brother? But they said, the man asked us pointedly about ourselves and our families, saying, is your father still alive? Have you another brother? And we told him according to these words. Could we possibly have known that he would say, bring your brother down? So maybe the previous chapter just doesn't record all of the narrative. I suspect it doesn't. But when you read the previous narrative, it was actually they who volunteered the information about their father and their brother. There wasn't a question from Joseph about that. But here they say that actually Joseph asked them pointedly about this. Maybe he did, and it's just plain not recorded. I suspect that wasn't the case. But nevertheless, verse 8, and then Judah said to Israel's father, send the lad with me, and we will rise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones. And so don't forget that there's actually a lot of people here, right, that are needy. Later on here, we'll see that there are 70 people who go down to Egypt, right? And so there are kids, there are grandkids, and there's probably twice as many servants as there were people. And so there's probably a couple of hundred people here that need food, right? And so, hey, we'll go down and get some if you'll send Benjamin with us. I myself will be surety for him, says Judah, from my hand you shall require him. If I don't bring him back to you and set him before you, then let me bear the blame forever. For if we had not lingered, surely by now we would have returned this second time. And so that kind of gives us a chronology sort of hint there. It's been about 2 months of time, right, that have taken place. And their father Israel said to them, if it must be so, then do this. Take some of the best fruits of the land in your vessels, and carry down a present for the man, a little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. These are all things that were not necessarily dependent upon having been harvested that year, right? These are things that they would have had from the past. Take double money in your hand and take that which was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. And take your brother also, arise and go back to the man. And may God Almighty give you mercy before the man, and may he release your other brother and Benjamin, If I am bereaved, then I am bereaved. I think Jacob really doesn't like Simeon. He doesn't even use his name. Like, go get your other brother. Like, yeah, that one, right? It's kind of like me and my kids. I forget their names sometimes, right? Get your other brother, the guy that's not here anymore. Verse 15, and so the men took the present and Benjamin, and they took double money in their hand, and they rose and went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, take these men to my home, and slaughter an animal and make ready. And these men will dine with me at noon. And then the men did as Joseph ordered, and the men brought the men into Joseph's house. And so this must have really seemed odd, right? Because there they are, like at the government center, in whatever Joseph worked, and this is where everyone went to buy grain and all that. And they appear, and next thing they learn is that they're going to Joseph's house for lunch, right? Which again must have seemed really odd. I mean, I've never been in this exact situation, but I have been to court before. Wasn't my fault. Long story. But like if like I appeared before the judge and the judge was like, hey, bailiff, like take that guy to my house over in Apex and we're going to have lunch together. I'd be like, what's going on here, right? And I would actually have come right back to Wake Forest as fast as I could because that doesn't seem right. Well, going to Joseph's house. And so verse 18, I think now, in a sense, kind of rightly, the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. And they said, is it because of the money which was returned in our sacks the first time that we're brought in? And so he may make a case against us and seize us to take us as slaves with our donkeys. And so again, they're kind of now articulating what they thought back in the previous chapter, that he's going to think we actually stole the money. This is why we're going to his house, which again, in a sense, doesn't make sense, right? Because if he thought that you were thieves, he's not going to take you to brunch, right? He's going to take you to jail, right? But this is all they've got, and so this is kind of what they're reasoning. And when they drew near to the steward of Joseph's house, they talked with him at the door of the house and said, "Oh, sir, we indeed came down the first time to buy food, like 2 months ago. But it happened when we came to our encampment that we opened our sacks, and there in each man's money was in the mouth of a sack, our money in full weight, and so we brought it back in our hand. And we have brought down other money in our hands to buy food. We don't know who put the money in our sacks," right? And so again, I kind of wonder what they think that he's going to say to this revelation. But what an incredible response here. But he said, the steward says, "Peace be to you. Don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." And he brought Simeon out to them. So this must have even sort of heightened maybe like their fear a bit, right? And it must have been like processing, like, what's this guy saying? Because there they are, Canaanites, Jews living in the land of Canaan. They're among the Egyptians, and there is this Egyptian servant. And his response to them bringing money to them is, "Peace be to you, don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has given treasure to you," which I think may be an indication that I suspect that Joseph has been talking with this guy, right, about his God and about his land and all of that. And so rather than get upset, he blesses them and he brings Simeon out. And that must have been quite a reunion. Like, why did it take so long? Well, because Dad doesn't like you. I don't know. I'm sure there's something going on there, right? Verse 24. And so the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, washed their feet, and gave their donkeys feed. So this, he's showing them incredible hospitality. Like, you didn't just do this to guys who show up to buy food. So he brings them to his house. He feeds their donkeys. He washes their feet. This is an incredible, kind of generous act. And they made the present ready for Joseph's coming at noon, for they heard that they would eat bread there. And then when Joseph came, they brought him the present, which was in their hand, into their house, and they bowed down before him to the earth. I imagine that he's thinking again about the dream that he had of them bowing. And he asked them about their well-being and said, "Is your father well, the old man whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They said, "Your servant, our father, is in good health. He's still alive." And they bowed their heads and they prostrated themselves. And so again, I imagine that there's all types of recollections here about past dreams. And then he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. And he said, "Is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." And now his heart yearned for his brother, and so Joseph made haste and sought somewhere to weep. This is not going to be the first time he does this. And he went into his chamber and wept there. And he washed his face. He came out. He restrained himself and said, "Serve the bread." And so, again, you see sort of all the emotion here. You see all that's kind of going on in Joseph's heart, seeing his brothers again for the second time in 20 years. His father still in good health, hasn't seen him, but sees his brother, his true brother, his full brother, who he wanted to see. And he really just sort of can't take it, right? He's just sort of overwhelmed with the whole process. And I wonder if he's even if he's grappled at this point, sort of thinking about, these are the dreams that God gave me 20 plus years ago, and now they're coming true. And I wonder if he's kind of put together at this point, as he'll tell his brothers coming up in a few chapters, like, I can now see the hand of God in all of this, right? And that God actually was superintending this entire deal, that God actually allowed me to be sold by my brothers into prison. God allowed me to be falsely accused. God allowed me to be in prison for 13 years. God raised me up to be second in charge of this country. And God was in sort of all of this, right? And it all coming together maybe at once. For Joseph, I imagine that was quite a moment and quite an emotionally heightened time for him. Probably for us it's the same way, right? You look back, you see how God was working in your life, the good and the bad, and you realize that He's had His hand on you the entire time, even though there were times when really bad things happened to you and you thought God was distant, right? But you realized, actually, no, He was there, and He was working through all these things to bring you to this very point, sort of where you are. And so, serve the bread, right? That's the proper response in verse 32. And so they set him a place by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because Egyptians could not eat food with Hebrews, for that's an abomination to the Egyptians, right? And so we know that the Egyptians took dining really seriously, and they had laws about what was clean and unclean, not only relating to the food, but also relating to the people. And so Egyptians wouldn't eat with Hebrews. I suspect that Joseph was eating by himself, not because he was Hebrew, but because of his position of power that he had, right? Being second in the land. And we know that the Egyptian rulers sort of would usually eat by themselves. They kind of think like maybe like a banquet, and like with dignitaries, right? And like all the important people had kind of the table up front, where they kind of eat, right? And so I think that's probably why Joseph is eating by himself, because while he was Hebrew, he had sort of become Egyptian, right? And everything about him was Egyptian. But whatever the case is, and there's like three tables, the people who are eating with separate tables, and probably even separate food to a degree. Verse 33, and they sat before him, the firstborn, according to his birthright, and the youngest, according to his birthright, according to his youth, rather. And the men looked in astonishment at one another. And so, like Joseph, he seats everyone according to their birth order. And you're like, well, that's actually not sort of that big a deal, right? There were 11 of them, and he just kind of puts them in order. But if you do the math, there are almost 41 million different possible combinations of how these guys could have been seated, right? And he actually seats them in the exact order that they were supposed to be seated in, which would have been quite astonishing, right? Because they were all men at this point, and you really sort of can't tell when they're all sort of generally, and bear in mind, like they were born by different mothers, and so some of them, were only a few months apart in age, right? He gets the exact same thing, the exact deal right. And then he took servings to them before them, but Benjamin's serving was 5 times as much as any of theirs. And so they drank and were merry with him, right? So a couple things here going on by way of the serving that takes place, right? So they're all seated in birth order, pretty incredible, and they're astonished at that. And then when it says, and then he took servings to them from before him. And so it was customary in the Egyptian culture that when you sat down to eat, and if you sat down to eat with rulers and things, that the rulers, like if they favored you, that they would give you sort of a portion of their food sort of off their table, right? And so not a lot, but just a portion would come to you. And again, that was a sign of favor. And so this is not to say that Benjamin had 5 times as much total food that the rest of the guys had, right? Because, you couldn't eat all that, right? But the portion that came, it says, from Joseph's table, from before him, that was 5 times as much, which still, I'm sure, was a lot, right? He got whatever they were. I don't know. He got like 5 cannolis and they got 1, right? Whatever it is. I don't know what the deal is, right? So why would Joseph do this, right? Because still, you can only eat like a certain amount of food, right? But again, we need to process this, again, through the context and through the lens that they would have seen this. And so, we live, right, again, in a context, right, where we have an abundance of food, right? We just plain do. If you run out of food, you can go to the store and buy some more food. Even the poorest among us, it's pretty rare that someone actually dies of starvation, right, in our context. I remember one time, I used to rent this room from this family in college. It's funny. A lot of things happened there, but I remember the African Children's Choir, came and sung at our church. You ever heard them before? So there's, I'm not sure, they still sing. I don't even know. So there was this group called the African Children's Choir, which they would take children who were literally parentless orphans on the streets in Africa, right? Who literally were starving to death, right? And they would get them together in this ministry. And they would teach them how to sing, and they would then put them on tour and provide for them and all that. And so these guys were coming to our church, right? And 4 of them were housing in the house that I rented this room, right? And I still remember we're sitting there in the living room and we're talking, to these kids. They're kids. They were I don't know, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, 7 to 12-year-old kids, right? So they are there, and there was this family had a daughter, that actually she was adopted. And she was maybe 10. She was a real nice girl, but she was probably 4 foot. Probably pushing 200 pounds. This was a really large girl. And we're sitting there talking with these Africans, whatever, and she yells out "Mom, when's dinner coming? I'm starving." And the looks that these Africans gave her were "Fat white girl, you are not starving, right?" It's really relative, right? She was just hungry, right? And we say that, "Hey, I'm starving. Where's my food?" In this day and time, people literally are starving, right? People are living, a subsistence type of life, right? And this is just their context. And so, for someone to get 5 times as much, yeah, they're going to eat it all, but it is more than everyone else, and it's going to be a really sort of big kind of valued gift to get a lot when pretty much no one has anything, right? And so why would Joseph do this? Well, I think, in one sense, you could be well, he was just excited and loved his brother. Well, yeah. But I think what he's doing, I think he's testing his brothers. Right? I think he's testing their character. Are they going to be envious? Are they going to actually say things against their brother because they hate him, because he's favored and now I'm favoring him as well, kind of thing? And hey, they don't know that I can understand their language. And so I think this entire thing is a test. I think that Joseph is testing his brothers in that, hey, make Benjamin appear, because I suspect that you might have sold him or killed him as well. And I think here he's actually testing their character by giving Benjamin 5 times as much as he'd given the rest of them. This is how things are teed up. And so, again, we got next week, no class, but after that we get 4 more weeks, and things here are teed up in the Joseph narrative, for, in a sense, the grand finale, right? It's going to all come together, and of course, we know the end of the story. We know what happens, but some things are going to have to happen before we get to what happens, and the story is resolved. All right, time's gone. I'll pray for us, and we'll be dismissed. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your provision for us. Thank you for Christ and the resurrection. And thank you, Father, that indeed none of us, Lord, has to deal with, has to worry about guilt. We don't need to be anxious and worry about things, Lord, because indeed you have taken our sin, that you're long-suffering, you're merciful, always willing, Lord, to forgive us our transgressions, and we are thankful for that. Lord, help us to keep in mind your care for us. Help us to keep in mind the provision that you've made through Christ on the cross. And I trust, Lord, that we wouldn't let our own misperceptions, Lord, of you, that we wouldn't let that cause there to be a gap in our relationship, but that we would fully accept the forgiveness that you offer to us. And we do ask all of this in Christ's name. Amen. I'll see you all in a couple weeks, if not Wednesday.